Hey, it's Don, the Auction Professor here. Today we're going to delve into records. We're just going to talk about 45s. I'm not going to delve into any other areas, and we're going to mostly touch on soul records because that's where a majority of the money is. Next one down the line is probably rockabilly, and then rock and garage, and then they dwindle on down from there. But the number one category to always look for 45s in is going to be in the soul category. We've sold records into that category into the $4,000 range or higher on several occasions. And we've sold many records in the $2,000 to $3,000 range on average many times each and every year that we have done this. So again, records are a big thing. We're going to talk something about the labels, the prices, and what to look for in these and how rare some of these are as well too. But we're going to go over the screen right now and we're going to talk about those records. We're going to talk about just soul records today. This is where I make most of my money if I'm selling a 45. Obviously, we do a ton in jazz, 78s, big band, rock, whatever the case may be. But this was the first area that I had my biggest score of all time. We've sold records, a single record, just like you see here, for over $4,000 ourselves for one single 45 that I paid $1 or less for it. Now, it's not something everybody's going to be able to do. It's going to take you a lot of time and effort to find good batches of 45s. It does help, too, that you have a lot of experience in the area. But again, I started off from nowhere on records. Loved music, had a ton of records, but I never knew anything about value or which ones to buy until I started getting into it. Nowadays, I know exactly which ones to nab. I grab the right labels or the right performers. This category I've gotten more questions on than probably any of the other ones just because of the sheer value. Now, a good soul record, 45, can go for 10 grand without a question. No issues whatsoever. I send most of these overseas. Most of them will go to England, Belgium, Germany, those type of countries. And most of them are songs that no one over here would have had a clue on what it was, who it was, even the label itself. Now, there's a ton on various labels, so I've had another question. Well, which label should I buy? I can't tell you which label to buy because there's no way to answer that question for the simple fact that labels aren't alone a deciding factor. Neither is the performer itself. The performer doesn't really matter for the most part, unless that performer only had one record on one label, and that one record on that one label is worth a ton of money, which just isn't the case for most. Now, there are some that, hey, any record by that person's worth a lot of money, but they're oddballs, something you're just not going to see, and if I told you, you probably wouldn't remember the name. There's thousands of them that are worth a ton of money, too, so I wouldn't even begin to know where to tell you what to do to look up these. Again, you're just going to have to start running into these. You're going to have to start, digging through and looking through big bunches of records. Now, just because you run into a big lot of records, say 5,000 records or something, and they're $500, it doesn't mean you're going to make a profit, even on 5,000 records at $500. Even at $100, it doesn't mean you're going to make a ton of profit. To look through, for an average person who doesn't know records, to look through 5,000 records, you're talking hours upon hours upon hours, because the only way a new person's going to know which ones are worth something is to start looking them up. I can tell you a general rule of thumb, if it's something that's in the top 40, it's not going to be worth much at all. Now, there are some exceptions to that. There's some exceptions to a lot of this, but for the most part, if you heard of it, chances are it's not going to be worth much. There's some Elvis songs that are worth more money than most on like a Sun with the 3 push marks or something. But for the most part, there's just no real way for me to tell you. The price guide alone for this is like 1,000 pages or something like that. And that only covers the common ones. Pretty much every one I'm going to show you here, the majority of them aren't going to be in any price guide, unless you're talking about the UK price guides, which are, there's 4 or 5 of them to actually cover this one field of Northern Soul. And those books are hundreds of dollars. I use 3, 4, 5 sites sometimes to price a single record. Just because some of these are so scarce, a perfect example. If you want to see a good record, one I've sold 3 copies of that you can actually see, it's Tommy and the Derbies, and that's on Swing, and that's a 45. Look on Pop Psych, and you'll see the ones that I had sold. There's one I sold for over $4,000. That one's available. These are typical examples. Now, there's only less than 100 of those ever pressed, from what I can gather. Maybe even less than that, and only 7 or 8 have ever shown up. I had 3 of them because the factory that made them was right where I lived at one time. So that's one key factor, is to look up local areas and what's available. Now, just because you see some available in the local area that were pressed locally, again, it doesn't mean they're worth a ton of money. Where I live now, we have sold some that are worth, $2,000-$3,000 from a local performer that's shown up here locally in a regional area. Like if it's a regional record, it's a regional production. They only usually market these regionally, so they only show up in certain areas. Now, high-end collectors, or back in the day, some of these would have been available in some areas in very limited quantity. You could order them and buy them if you really had a hit, but that's the gist of it. Northern Soul is literally from the north of in the U.S. It's basically a British term for Northern Soul, from everything I gather, because most of the people who call them Northern Soul are British. Usually it's a B-side, something that no one's heard of, that was a dance hit in England and still is dance hits in some of the retro halls and things like that. So there's just a ton to this. I'm going to just show you a spattering of records here, high dollar ones. Most people get more interested in this and are willing to spend the time when they can see the money that is available in here. The record category is huge, and there's a ton of money involved. Every record I'm going to show you here is a 45 that goes for over $1,000. And there's so many of these that it's, I could go on for days and just show you these. There's a site that has $1 million worth of 45s, and it's just these type of records. It's just pictures of records, and it literally is over $1 million worth of these type of records. It doesn't take long to add up that quickly when you see some of the values. There's like a Zebra 101. That's the Zebra is the title or the maker on the disc, and the Zebra 101, the record itself is worth over $10,000. The performer isn't the issue. It's like a one-time record. It's on the back of Osborne's book, if you know who Osborne is. He writes price guides for records. So anyway, we're just gonna go over some here. Bernard Drake. This is Louisiana. It's literally a Lafayette label. These are smaller ones. Now, you're going to run into this one. I've had many from this label. Not necessarily a Drake one, but I've had many from this label. Most aren't worth a lot of money. Again, the harder to get ones aren't going to show up very much at all, and you're going to have to really dig for them. And I do. We find several a year worth, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 every year. Last year, just before Christmas, we got one worth, $4,200. We had another one worth $27. So, they do show up. You're just going to have to dig. You're going to have to go to a lot of places and spend some time. And again, if you buy a lot and you want to spend a couple $100s on like 5,000 records just to learn them, that's fine. But don't always expect to make money on them. You always have to look through whatever you buy to make sure that there is value there. Don't sell yourself short. Don't assume that it's worth some money and you're going to make a ton of money because there's a ton of records. If someone's looked through all of those records, the only way you might make profits on them is selling them in a bunch, in a lot. And you're talking a couple hundred you have to sell. The minimum we usually sell if we're selling a lot of 45s is like 125-ish in that range or more. Sometimes I sell 500 at a time. But to make the real good money, you have to have at least something decent in there for somebody to want it. And you're going to have to list the titles of the songs these days to get some bids on it or get some purchases from those. People aren't going to buy random lots of junk records or big bulk records because they understand that they've probably been looked through just like postcards or whatever else the case may be. I'm not saying you can't find a big chunk of records on eBay and make some money, but for the most part, no. You're just going to be wasting your time and money. And then you're adding in shipping, and shipping on, 40, 50 pounds of records does add up as well, too. And again, if you're buying a big chunk of records, you're going to have a ton of time as a newbie trying to figure out what's what. And you're going to be looking up so many records, it's going to take you days to go through 5,000 records. Me, on the other hand, I can look through 5,000 records very quickly. A second or two on each record is about all it takes me to look at them. Once in a while, I'll have to stop, flip them over, and make sure, but for the most part, I can tell just by looking at one side of one record as to where I'm at on that record value-wise. But this one here, as you can see, $4,500 on this one. And we're not going to spend a ton of time on this. I'm just piquing your interest here. The ellipsis. And this one's just a very scarce one. It's from St. Louis, Briar Mead. I've never seen this label in person. I've seen it in the books. I know it's there. It's a newer one, 1976. Price-wise, $4,550. 35 bits. Most of these are not insane. These are not people marketing or trying to money launder or anything like that. These are legit sales. Don't ever be shocked on some of these 45s. These all sell in this price range, especially these rare ones. This is something that's probably only a couple of hundred of them. Let's see here. Now, this is a private, not necessarily private, but a small town, Fayetteville, North Carolina. This is probably, 80s, it says right there. It's like a generic label even, really cheaply made. It's what the music is as opposed to what the label is. So people usually mess with, soul records 70 and before, but modern soul is like into the 80s. Sometimes even a 90s one can sell into the thousands of dollars. Ice is the label. I've only had one Ice 45 in my life. So again, these are stuff that's just not going to show up. But again, they are there. Lots of people run into these. You will see the same ones over and over again, selling for a lot of money. $48.50, 36 bids. This one I've had. I haven't had a nice copy of it, unfortunately. It's something that you're going to get, in lesser quality. We sold it for around $3,000. United Sound. It's a good one. That's all I can say. Crossover soul now is when it crosses like genres. This group may not necessarily be a soul group. They could be rock, they could be country, but they had one that crosses over into soul, and then now it's considered a soul classic, and boom, it's worth some money. Didn't make a lot, didn't think it would be worth a lot of money, so that's where this one comes into play. You can see $5,532, 20 bids. Excello. Now, a lot of people think a lot of labels are scarce, and they'll think, oh, wow, I've got this Excello label. It's worth a lot of money. Excello is a very common label. You may have never seen it before, never heard of it before. They go all the way back into the 78 era Excello records. I've got many from 78s. I've gotten many Excello. Bebop Baby, the Peacheroos. This is a doo-wop. It's in the R&B soul category. So soul can include doo-wop and R&B into that genre. And Northern Soul is basically just a generic term used to describe the area and the genre as a general, from a European view, I would say. So, again, this is a very nice one, $3,425. Don't, again, worry about the labels so much on every one of these because, again, you're not going to know which one's scarce and which one's not. I usually say look for the groups that are like the Peacheroos. The word the in front of some can be a helpful hint for some, but not all. There's 1,000 other records that say the in front of it that aren't worth anything. But if you see one on like a ABC or a Warner Brothers or something like that, I always look for the word the in there. And then oddball names that sound like they could be a soul singer to some extent. But $34.25, as I said. Megatone, this label will show up. It's a small one. There's a couple, I believe, labels with Megatone, but they're from different companies. You will see that occasionally. Robert Tanner is somebody who's well known, at least in the Southern and soul genre. Maybe not to you or many other people, but he is known to me anyway. Lynchburg label. It's a fairly scarce one, $3,200. Again, I'm just showing you a wide variety. The Love Lights is actually a group, the Love Lights, and this is a Love Light record label from Chicago. Delon Washington, now, if I'm not mistaken, Delon was part of one of these other groups, and that's where this all comes into play. But this one went for $2,750. This was a buy it now. Boom, it was out the door. This label you're probably not going to find. I've had some on the Love Light label, not this version of it as well, too, and not this performer, so that's a big key there. We're outside of Detroit, not too far, so I do find very good records on a very regular basis. This one here is Simcoe. This is not a rare label at all. There's a ton of them. This one was distributed by Bell at one time, and then they were on their own, too, so you're going to have to learn some of this. Gene Tunes... I mean, again, it's hard to tell you specifics. This one does say promo, so usually if it's a promo, it's worth a little more. In some cases, Northern Soul records like this were only issued as a promo. There's, like Rick Tick and things like that, some of these other labels that, you probably never heard of that again. I don't want to just shout out labels, but Rick Tick is a common label. There's a song called Backstreet that's only available on a promo. So, and that's a very good record. It used to be. Now this market's changed over time. So the majority of the more common stuff that used to sell for $200 or $300 now maybe sells for $20, $30, or $40. So now the truly rare are all that really goes super high or is worth messing with in our part. The rest get dumped in big lots. We do sell some cheaper, $20, $30, $40, $50 ones when they fly by us, but I'm almost always just trying to pick out these high dollar ones and then, cherry picking a lot and then be done with it. So anyway, let's move on from here. $2,650, 41 bids. Now this is a Boss. This is a fairly common one. I run into this label. I've had some from the Celebritize on the Boss label, but again, there's several by them. So again, not everyone's worth this much money. $2,595, only one bid. Again, this is considered a holy grail one for many. And again, another thing to think about is some of these have been reproduced. So you're going to have to be cautious and know the difference. A price guide on this one, or at least looking online on many sites, is your only key way to distinguish. You sell the wrong one to the right person, you're going to get some major flack back and probably a negative feedback. Not knowing is not necessarily a way out if you didn't know. Gene Tune, Love Triangle, I've heard this one. Most of these, if you go online on YouTube, you can find a version of it on YouTube of the song itself. So if you're not sure what type of music it is based on the label or anything like that, there's no deciding factors, and you don't have a record player, a lot of them you can find online. But any kind of record that I'm showing you today, you're going to want to play to make sure it plays from start to finish, both sides without issue. Every single speck of this has to be played, and you got to be sure on it too. So anyway, this is a good one, $2,511, 5 bids. Some of these, too, you could have just put up on a buy it now. Condition, again. Had this one been better in condition, this one might have been a $4,000 or $5,000 record. I've had this record myself, the Delights. This specific song shows up. It's pressed here locally, like in the Detroit, Michigan area, so it does show up. There's 3 or 4 of a lot of these online at any given time, too, so just keep that in mind. 48 bids, $2,425. Northern Soul Funk. Now funk fits in there too. You also see the word breaks. Breaks is the drum beats, just the drums going off and things like that. If you want to hear a good example that you can go on right now online and hear breaks, Sweet Pea, that's the name of the song, Sweet Pea. I think it's Tommy James and the Shondells. Oh, Sweet Pea is the song. But there's some breaks when the drums come in. That is what you're looking for. That is what breaks are. And most people look for breaks, and that's usually something you'll see in the title. If it has it in it, it's usually worth more. People like that. That's a key factor in some of these, too. Funk will have breaks in it for the most part. And usually when you see the word funk, that's a big, big sign there. The Jewel Band was, there's a Jewel record label, and that's probably the connotation, Fred Williams and the Jewel Band. A lot of these soul and northern groups like this will have a name and then the something group with it as well, too. So the Fabulouses, the Dynatones, or something like that. So usually you look for a name and then a group with it. Those are usually singing doo-wop soul records for the most part. There are rock versions as well, too, but $2,358 on this one, 11 bids. Optimum. This one record I've had before. Not Joe Jama, unfortunately, but this is a $2,325 record, 21 bids. Optimum is a common, I shouldn't say common, but it's one that does show up. You can type that in on most sites that, have pricing for records, and you're going to find a ton of them. Sting's another one that does show up. BV and the Honeybees. I've seen this one before. I've had others buy this group. Not this one, unfortunately. Usually you can tell once you've done this enough on the actual song titles, sometimes give it away as well, or the labels in general. $2,297, 34 bids. Scream. Now Scream's a good one. There's 5 or 6 of this exact record up right now, all in the same price range. Billy Bird. This is the one you want, $2,050 with 26 bids. Ron. Now, this label is from Louisiana. I've had, I don't know how many hundreds of this label, so they're not all worth very much. Bill Bush is the one that's the key on this. There's 3 or 4 other performers on the same level that do have good value. Just over $2,000, 41 bids.
Again, this is just a primer here, just giving you an idea. Again, the title, the combinations, the whatever it is. The word the usually helps out a little bit if you're new to this. Kim tone, not a good one to find. You're not going to find many of these. I've had one or two in my life on this label. Not worth, $3,000 like this one, though. So, the 7th Avenue Aviators. Again, this is a scarce one. Congress, though, the label shows up a ton of times. I've got thousands of this label in my time. There are some that sell, still for good money on this label. This is a better one. This is an oddball one. The 7th Avenue Aviators is very scarce. I've had one by it, wasn't in good condition. I didn't get, anywhere near this for it. But again, I'm always happy, even if it's a bad copy of a good record, because it's still worth some money. $1,899. One person bid on it. Here's another one, Carla label. Now, this is not a scarce label. This one's got some major damage. You can see some fuzz at the top. The label's been scuffed up. Dancing a Hole in the World, Jimmy Delphs. Now, there's different versions of this same song, this same performer, on different labels that aren't worth anywhere near this. It's always the first pressing, the first label that the song was on. Most of the time, stuff like this is pressed on a small-town label, and then a big company will buy it out and then repress the exact same songs, both sides, same performer, same titles, on their label. That one's not worth anywhere near it. Sometimes it's worth still some money, but this one's specific. I've had this one. I know the song. Very good one. $1,825 with 17 bids. The Moments. Now, this is a key one here on Hog. I look for this one everywhere. Anytime I see a Hog label, I'm always praying it's the Moments. There's a ton of Moments that are worth a ton of money, including some worth like $6,000, $7,000. Again, I can't tell you how many dollars I've made off of 45s. It's a ton, and I do mean a ton, every year. 78s are catching up really quickly, though, with the market changes and stuff. I've talked about this. You got to stay with the market. So when 45s go down, we move to another area. When they go back up, we slide around. I'll set stuff aside. Markets fluctuate. Time of season fluctuates with 45s. 78's the same thing. 78s have a better area to sell on. We sell more 78s on Amazon than we do on eBay. So again, just keep in mind some of these factors here. Sometimes I'll put a 45 up. I'll let somebody else sell it for me on a different site, a specific site, and it goes as an auction there because there'll be more chances than some Europeans seeing it. There are some other sites to sell stuff on, and which I do use occasionally. But $1,780. This one has 78 bids. The Moments are always hot. Always, always, always. Now here's a common as can be label, ABC. The Trends, though. This is a good one. Thanks for a little lovin'. You're going to get the gist on this at some point if you do it enough. So just try and keep that in mind on these. So anyway, $1,675, 23 bids. Coho Tech Recordings, Foreign Blue Renaissance. This is a very scarce one. I've only had a couple on this label at all. And you'll see something on some of these labels sometimes. There's no technical number on sometimes. This one has one. It's number 111 for the record disc number. You're going to have to pay attention to all of that information. It all means a ton because sometimes they release the same record with a different number and a different flip song on there. So don't always get excited when you see something scarce. $1,613, 14 bids. Big Mac, again, not a scarce label. It doesn't show up very often, though. Bob and Fred, usually and names like Dave and Bill or Tom and Dave. A lot of those are soul records, so you're just going to get the gist on some of these. Again, this one has Northern Soul. Best bet on these when you don't know your records is to put a clip of the first 30 seconds of either side of the disc up. That's what I do. Never more than that. Never ever an entire song, just so they can't just rip the song and then not want to buy the record. So just keep that in mind. 53 bids, $1,610. Now, Arctic has a ton of high-dollar performers, but the majority of Arctic labels are not worth a lot of money. Kenny Gamble is. There's a lot of female performers on this label that are worth a ton of money, and it's mostly the DJ and promo ones, too. So, $1,525 with 87 bids. Real key one here. I always look for Arctic. I always look for the Arctic label. There's a ton of performers on this. Kenny Gamble's on a ton of labels. So, again, I can't tell you specific labels to always buy because you get the wrong Kenny Gamble. It's not worth much. It's worth 50 cents a dollar. So, again, there's no way to give you a hint. A cheat sheet for records would fill up, a book at least. That's the point. Even if you're just picking out the high dollar ones, it would still fill a book up. Most of the price guides don't include so many discs that are worth money. It's pathetic in some ways. But anyway, let's move on. Beauty, scarce label. Charisma is well known in the record collecting circle on many different labels. There's a ton of different labels that this group's on, but there's only a few that are worth anything. And this is one of them here. This is some sort of promotional too. Thank you, Soul One, for this purchase. It's a good one, $1,500, 24 bids. These are all in excellent condition for the most part. At least the disc will play. It's VG or VG Plus. Omen, again, not a scarce label. The Capitals are a fairly common group, but this label that they're on is the key here with this song. Oh, What You've Done to Me. Again, this song you can hear online. I've heard this one quite a few times. Mostly Europeans are buying this, as I said. VG Light Scratches. I don't know if that's really a VG. It's hard to say by the photo, but it very well could be. VG is about a mid-grade. 17 bids, $1,424. LaSalle, another. It's not a scarce label again. The Antiques, though, is fairly... It's almost on the scarce side, the group itself, anything by them. But for the most part, most of them aren't worth a ton of money. I've had them on many common labels, but I haven't had many of the Antiques. They do show up occasionally. $1,400, just a hair over, 22 bids. And let's pop one more out here for you. Another Modern Soul, Beale Street. Label isn't super scarce. They've got some newer ones on here. This is 80s, late 80s probably even, I would say, on this one. Usually if it has a phone number, it's automatically 80s on it. And you can see a phone number there. 80s to even the early 90s. There are still some that are worth some money that are from the 90s. As I said, this is Modern Soul Disco. So I'm not a fan on disco, but I do look for these type of discs. They usually do very well. And this one you can see $1,611, 22 bids. I wish there was a way to give you a cheat on this. There's just not. You're going to have to get the gist if you want to dig into this. And I know a lot of people said, "Ooh, yeah, I want to get into records." They look at the prices. They see what some of these go for. It's taken me years, and I do mean years. I've been into records prior to going full-time, so I've bought records for probably 15 or 20 years to get where I'm at in the record field. I'm not saying that's how long it's going to take you, because we didn't do it full-time, and it was, on and off, but records alone is going to take you a long time. It's going to take you months and months to get to that way. But if you get good enough like us, you can cherry pick a set, cherry pick a collection, cherry pick a estate sale or a flea market, and just pull out the good ones. I am good on that, and I'll take a chance depending on the price, where I don't have to dig and, buy a whole bunch at once, or, I can just buy a couple records, the ones that I think are key, and not always look them up. That's just the key for my personality and how I do it, because I know I've looked at millions, and I mean millions and millions of records in my time. There isn't a week goes by that we don't buy big bulks of them, 5,000, at least a couple thousand almost every single week of my life. No exaggeration, those are real numbers. Whether they'd be 45s, LPs, or 78s. 78s are my favorite. Takes a little more complicated task to wrap them up safely, though. So, but anyway, that's just a touch on this. Hopefully that gives you a real strong idea on the value. I could have showed you hundreds and hundreds of more that sold in the last 90 days just on eBay that went for over $1,000, but we're just touching it here. We're trying to pique your interest. Dan Greer is not a rare performer. There are other records by Dan Greer. But again, it's a combination of the label, the performer, and the specific song. All of that has to tie in to the exact one that's worth the money. You can have the same specific label like Beale Street with Dan Greer singing a song, but not be the right song and only be worth a couple bucks. So again, just take that into consideration whenever you are looking up records. Don't buy big bulk records unless you're willing to risk not making any money just for the aspect of education. I know some people have said so in the past, and you got to know something about records. If you're a new person to selling records and you only have a few up, you will not get as much as someone who's got a ton of records up for those records, because people won't trust your skills on grading them. So just keep that in mind too. That's pretty much a given, I can tell you, from long time experience on this. So anyway, that's what I have for you.
Well, there you go. There's a monster bolo for us. This is something I look for every day of the week. It's something you can find. You can buy them in bulk. But again, you've got to do your homework. You've got to research. You've got to know that it's not a copy or a forgery. There's many, many, many reissues of records. People can press records in their garage these days if you buy some of the older used equipment. So anyway, well, hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully that gave you some thoughts and some ideas. If you did, please hit the like button down below. You can also hit the bell icon to be notified when I post new content or go live. Subscribe and tell a friend.